Welcome back to another Danny Phantom review. Today we are talking about the episode Urban Jungle. This is one of the more famous episodes of this season, and it's on the better end, I would say. One of the reasons this episode is more memorable is it got this big marketing push. For whatever reason, they went all in on this episode. It even got a video game tie-in for the DS, which I did a video about. Link in the prescription. There was also like a flash game, and it just had more marketing involved in it compared to your average episode. They even got Mark Hamill to play the villain of this episode, Undergrowth, this big plant monster ghost guy.
The plant one?
With
Overgrowth? Undergrowth? Is it Undergrowth?
It might be Undergrowth.
It should be Overgrowth, though.
I think it's supposed to be Overgrowth.
Or is that the play on the word? Because Overgrowth is when plants
an overgrown plant, yeah.
Have taken over a building or something, right?
Yes.
So it must be Undergrowth, because then it's the opposite of that.
Which is cool, and I think he's really fun here. He just kind of hams it up as this really goofy, over-the-top villain.
Flesh dwellers, you have caused pain to my children once too often. Now you too shall feel pain. The pain of Undergrowth.
But it's also just kind of like, why this episode? In the grand scheme of things, this isn't a terribly important episode of the show. And Undergrowth is really only a character in this one episode, so it's like we finally got Mark Hamill in this show, and it's just kind of a one-off thing. He is fun here. He's very over the top, but I enjoyed him. This episode is not terrible. It still has some problems, which we'll get into, but I found that I was the least bored during this episode compared to the first couple of the season. So the plot, there's a big plant monster called Undergrowth, played by Mark Hamill. He's taken over the town. He's mind-controlling Danny's friends, and Danny has to fight him. That's the episode. The other big thing in this one is that he feels like he's sick. He's feeling very cold, and he doesn't know why. It's like he has the chills. He first fights Undergrowth, and he can't defeat him, so he runs away to the ghost zone to try to get help from Frostbite. Frostbite then teaches Danny that the cold that he's feeling is actually the development of a new ghost power. He can freeze things now. That's his new power. And the way they explain it in this one is that it's actually an extension of his ghost sense. What he thought his ghost sense was is actually just him slowly developing this freeze ability. I'm not a huge fan of this thing. Normally I like how Danny gets new powers over the course of the series. I think that's cool. But this one is just like not really foreshadowed very well. Frostbite talks about how he's really good at using freeze ability because he's a Yeti or whatever. But I don't even think in the last episode we saw him use a freeze ability at any point. So it's not something that's really foreshadowed that well, unlike a lot of Danny's other powers, where at least we see Vlad use them first, so that it's a bit more of a setup. And the idea that it's an extension of his ghost sense is just so weird and retconny, and again, this season kind of muddying up the lore and the rules of the world. Before, Danny just, he felt cold when a ghost was nearby, but that's not the same as he can shoot freeze rays. Those are two different things. That doesn't really make sense that they're connected. Anyways, Danny has a training montage with Frostbite, and he learns to control this new freeze power, which he then uses to defeat Undergrowth, and the day is saved. That's basically the episode. The episode isn't amazing, but it mostly works. It's this big boss fight with this crazy big villain that takes over the entire town, which is fine. The problem more comes later on in the season, when we get several more episodes where a big bad ghost takes over the entire town and Danny has to spend the whole episode fighting him. This is only episode 3, so it's not really a recurring problem yet. It is kind of annoying that we haven't seen Danny at high school the last couple episodes, but again, that's not necessarily a problem with this episode specifically. It's okay if you have a big bad villain show up every once in a while. It's just that up to this point, the only times that that's really happened are in big two-parter episodes that really let the weight of those big battles, let that breathe, and we really got a sense that this was a big deal. Where this is just kind of like episode 3, plant monster attacks, and that's it. But overall, most of the stuff I think kind of works in this episode, even though it's not set up before this episode. The way that they set up Danny's freeze ability and how he learns to use it over the course of the episode, I think mostly works. I like the idea of Frostbite being kind of a mentor figure to Danny. Danny doesn't have very many positive mentor figures in the show, and so it's nice that there's like a ghost. He has a ghost ally that can help him learn to use his powers better. That's kind of a nice idea, and I think Frostbite works as a character much better in this one than he did in the previous episode. Again, Mark Hamill is really fun as this goofy over-the-top villain. Sam gets taken over and kind of joins Undergrowth's side, becoming this evil plant version of herself, which the Danny Phantom fan base is a big fan of. I don't really care about it, but I think it's at least almost an idea here. We talked about this a little bit in our season 3 thing, which you can watch if you want. But there's like almost a good idea for an episode here, which is that Sam is like a vegan, right? And she likes plants, she hates capitalism, she doesn't eat meat. In this episode, we get to see that she has a greenhouse, which is kind of cool. We've never seen that before. And then this big plant monster shows up and starts attacking the town. Here you have the opportunity for like an interesting character thing with Sam. If they had made this episode about like, you know, maybe more of a poison ivy type, a villain that's has potentially sympathetic goals and motivations, and you can kind of understand their point of view, but they just take things way too far, and therefore they're the villain. Instead of just being an immediate huge plant monster that wants to destroy the city, like if there was like, if Undergrowth was like a guy or like a lady who's like, plants are cool and capitalism is bad, and then like they befriend Sam and like they go to high school with them or whatever, and then they turn out to be this crazy plant monster that, you know, wants to destroy the city. But Sam's friends with her, and then they, you know, she sympathizes with her plight, and like there's like almost an idea in this episode, because like, yeah, plants are good and we should have them and not destroy them. Like, that's true. The villain has like potentially justified motivations in this episode. They just don't spend any time addressing or exploring that, because as soon as he shows up, he's like destroying the town, and then he mind controls everyone. So even though Sam theoretically would be sympathetic to Undergrowth, and there could be like an interesting thing there where like Danny's like, Sam, this has gone too far, but maybe she's kind of agreeing with this eco-terrorist, you know, like there's potentially an idea here. They don't quite do it, which is upsetting. Because, yeah, like, Sam's mind controlled. Like, she's on the side of the villain because the villain's mind controlling her. So it's not even her doing it. I don't know. There's almost a really, really good idea in this episode. And I think part of that is what makes this episode stand out amongst season 3 episodes, where normally it's just like, there's a ghost tornado and you gotta fight it. There's at least kind of an idea going on here. And the, like, puberty metaphor of Danny learning, developing a new power mostly works in the context of this episode. Other details: when Danny first arrives at Frostbite's place, they put him in a Bacta tank, just like Luke on Hoth. It's literally just that. And I guess because Star Wars reference, we got Mark Hamill. It's apparent that they tried a little bit harder on this episode. I just wish that they would have tried more. A little bit more. Like, Danny's family even has a couple fun moments, but yeah, any potentially interesting ideas kind of quickly devolve into the big plant monster, we gotta fight it, which again isn't completely terrible for this episode either, just that we begin to see this as a trend going forward this season, where almost every episode there's a big bad ghost they gotta fight, and then they just spend the whole episode fighting it. That's about it. One of the more memorable episodes of this season, for better or for worse. It had a video game. Mark Hamill's in it. He's kind of fun. But I wish that they took their time a little more with this episode and let the ideas develop and get fleshed out, because I think there is something to this premise. But that's about it for this one. So we will continue our journey through season 3 of Danny Phantom in the next episode.
Danny Phantom.